A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms came out just a couple months ago, and it has already been praised by audiences and critics alike. It received an impressive 8.8 overall rating despite review bombing, and today we are going to talk about the highest rated episode, In the Name of the Mother, which got a 10 out of 10 rating when it first aired. We will be focusing on the Trial of Seven and why, in my humble opinion, it is the best fight scene to come out recently, and a masterpiece of action writing. This episode has already been analysed in countless video essays, and I am admittedly a bit late to the praise bandwagon. So instead, I want to focus on a theme I don't see discussed enough, and which I found to be the most compelling and unique part of the episode: the accuracy of the armour. Most modern media has little to no armour accuracy. The protagonist's armour seems to protect them from everything, with only minor injuries, while the mindless grunt soldiers are dressed like their armour is made of paper. Medieval armour can be split into two groups: chainmail and heavy plate. Chainmail is made of small metal rings linked together. It has lots of gaps and holes which make it lightweight overall. Those same gaps mean it uses less metal, making it cheaper to produce. Its main advantage is protection against swords, since the rings help stop slicing blows. Chainmail is also very flexible, so it can cover the body without limiting movement. However, because it is so flexible, it cannot stop blunt force weapons like hammers. It may resist slashes, but stabbing blows can still penetrate it, even if they do not cut as deeply as they would without armour. And because the links are made of thin metal, chainmail can be brittle and break fairly often. Heavy plate armour basically fixes all the problems chainmail has. It can block stabbing and slicing blows completely. It can reduce or sometimes eliminate blunt force trauma. It is incredibly durable, and since it is rounded, it can deflect poorly aimed stabs, slices, and arrows. Unlike chainmail though, it is incredibly heavy. It requires a lot of metal, so it's very expensive. And because it is rigid, it can restrict movement if it is placed in the wrong areas. So we can see that neither armor type is perfect. Each has its own pros and cons, but they work extremely well together. The challenge is knowing where each type is useful and where it might actually be a disadvantage. A knight will typically armour himself in the following order. He starts with chainmail covering most of his body. Its weight and flexibility do not interfere much with movement, and its affordability makes it a basic necessity. His lower legs are not especially important to protect, since any opponent low enough to threaten them would likely be exposing their neck and head for an easy kill, so simple trousers should do. The neck, on the other hand, is easier to reach, so we add a neck guard to stop stabs and slashes there. Oftentimes this neck guard will have a lip, or in this case several metal dots, whose main purpose is to stop swords sliding up the guard and into the neck. We also want a great helm of heavy plate to protect the head, plus gauntlets for the hands. Throw on a dirty yellow tunic and we have Dunk's armour for the trial. He has chainmail covering most of his body, giving him protection against slashes and only allowing small, non-fatal stab wounds. His head and neck need the heavy plate most because they are instant kill areas, and the gauntlets are for his often exposed hands. His visor is narrow, which severely limits his vision, but it is narrow enough to stop a sword from taking his eyes out. Looking more closely at the episode, we see that Dunk actually only has a gauntlet on his right hand. In the first tilt, Dunk's left hand will be holding his shield, so it is constantly protected. Not having the gauntlet on his left hand allows him to carry the shield more easily, and make quick adjustments when blocking attacks. Dunk's armour is the ideal basic layout for someone who wants solid protection at a lower cost. If Dunk had a bit more money, then we could add heavy plate to protect his chest, arms and legs, which is similar to what Aerion has chosen. A full suit of heavy plate to protect himself completely. The rigidity of the plate means that the only real weakness in Aerion's armour are the joints. Aerion can easily afford this armour, and the only downside would be its weight, but since he is meant to be on horseback for most, if not all of the trial, that weight is not much of an issue. Next, we need to talk about their choice of weapons. Both sides start with war lancers, but once unhorsed, lancers are not very useful, so they switch to secondary weapons. Dunk uses a sword for the simple reason that that is all he has. Against Aerion, his main strategy should be to target the joints in Aerion's armor. These are gaps in the plate, so they would only have chainmail underneath, and are therefore vulnerable to stabbing blows. Finding these joints will be difficult, so Dunk has to get in close to land those attacks. Luckily, Dunk has a considerable size and weight advantage over Aerion. If he can pin Aerion to the ground, it would be easy to find those weak points and end the trial right there. Aerion uses a flail as his secondary weapon. Since Dunk is not wearing much plate, his best strategy is to break Dunk's bones and cause as much internal bleeding as possible by striking his chest, where he only has mail. Alternatively, he could target Dunk's head. This would be a bad choice if Aerion was using a sword, but a blunt force weapon like a flail could cause concussion and brain damage. If Aerion can inflict enough head trauma, he may be able to knock Dunk out or disorientate him enough to remove his helm and kill him with his dirk, a small dagger knights often kept for when they got too close to an opponent to use their main weapon. Now that we have established why they are armoured in the way they are, their weapon choices, and what their ideal strategy should be, how realistic are Dunk and Aerion's fighting styles really? Very. In fact, every choice they make and every outcome they reach is determined by the strategies they are best suited for and the armour they are wearing. Aerion wins the first tilt, leaving Dunk with a serious lance wound in his abdomen. Chainmail has no chance of stopping a lance at that speed. Aerion's next blow uses his Morning Star, since his lance is broken. The force of the strike, combined with the horse's speed, is enough to knock Dunk out completely. If Aerion had aimed anywhere else, Dunk would likely have suffered major internal bleeding and broken bones, but might still have been conscious and able to fight back. Aerion's choice here makes complete sense. When Dunk wakes up, we see that one of his eyes is bruised and covered in pus, showing that the blows in this fight are causing consistent injuries. Dunk then takes several blunt force blows to the head from Aerion, then Maekar, and then Aerion again. Dunk tackles Aerion to the ground, using his weight to pin him. They both try and remove each other's helms, and Dunk, lacking a blunt weapon, repeatedly slams Aerion's head into the ground, before Aerion stabs Dunk in his exposed mail. This is a perfect example of the need for a dirk. There is no way Aerion can swing his Morning Star this close. We can also see that, no matter how hard he tries, Aerion cannot drive the knife too deeply into Dunk's body. A great example of the realism in the chainmail. Aerion takes advantage of Dunk's distraction, and clearly tries to lift Dunk's helm, just enough to slip his dirk into his neck. This would make short work of Dunk and win Aerion the trial, so Dunk is desperate to try and stop this, even sacrificing his hand to do so. Dunk is stabbed in his left hand, which, as we discussed earlier, is the hand not protected by plate. If Dunk had instead used his right hand, he may be in a much better place right now. Raymond the Goat Fossaway then knocks Aerion off Dunk, and we get that perfect shot of him looking back. Probably has a very smug, satisfied look on his face, before getting humbled almost immediately. Seeing that blunt force attacks are not damaging Dunk's head enough, Aerion switches tactics to a death by 1,000 cuts approach, stabbing Dunk several times in his mailed areas, while still making use of his metal shield for blunt force strikes. Dunk is injured, disorientated, and down on one knee. Aerion, who is far shorter than Dunk, sees this opportunity to get close to Dunk's head and tries to stab him in the eye. We get several shots of Dunk's helm restricting his vision, and this gives us a perfect example of why his visor has to be so narrow. The visor still blocks the wider parts of the dirk, so Aerion's cut is not too deep, but it is still a grievous wound. In movies like Spider-Man, when an actor's face is covered by a mask, you often get scenes where the protagonist takes the mask off for no real reason. The actual reason would be so we could see the actor's face and therefore get their acting and emotions. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms shows that you can still do this while keeping it logical within the story. Dunk cannot see properly, so he has to remove his helm, even though it makes him a lot more vulnerable. Dunk gets a rush of adrenaline, and throws a few powerful blows that Aerion easily blocks with his shield, but Dunk finally manages to find a gap in Aerion's plate, and lands a devastating blow to Aerion's groin. Dunk then stumbles around and collapses from his injuries. When Dunk arises again in a moment of triumph, The fight continues with both men exhausted and badly wounded. You can directly see the consequences of the many injuries Dunk gets during the trial. Aerion, on the other hand, is exhausted from having to fight in a full suit of heavy plate. Aerion strikes first, and incredibly his blow lands on the only piece of plate Dunk is wearing, his neck guard. This might seem stupid, but if Aerion had aimed slightly higher, Dunk's head would have been cut clean off. The neck is far softer and more fragile than the head, since there is no skull to absorb the blow. Dunk once again tackles Aerion to the ground, this time pinning him properly and using his weight to keep him down. We see him trap both of Aerion's arms with his knees and disarm him. Dunk now has a blunt weapon, Aerion's shield, which he uses against the now defenseless Aerion to beat him into submission. Dunk rips off Aerion's visor and punches him several times with a mailed fist. He could easily slip his dirk into Aerion's neck at this point, but our protagonist is far too honourable for that and pauses, allowing Aerion to yield. In every moment of this fight, the armour and strategies make complete sense. Plenty of other YouTubers have already broken down what makes this episode so good. The choreography is phenomenal, the fights feel grounded, and the use of perspective, especially when the audio cuts to what Dunk hears, really pulls you into the moment. There's a great touch where Aerion almost sounds like a dragon, distorted through Dunk's dazed state. All of this builds an incredible sense of immersion, but since those elements have been covered in detail, I wanted to cover something that doesn't get talked about as much. Making the armour realistic doesn't just appease medieval history fans, it creates consistency in how the wounds are dealt, and makes the stakes of the fight feel believable. For a long time now, I've been incredibly frustrated with the state of action/fight scenes in modern media, being sloppy, unrealistic CGI fests with overly choreographed dance-like movements. It has been so refreshing to watch a TV show break this formula and deliver something genuinely realistic and compelling. Whenever I would watch those modern fight scenes, I would often think about how much better action and battle scenes are in the A Song of Ice and Fire books, due largely to the focus on strategy and realism, rather than flashy moves. So I want to start a new series on my channel, going over the battle and fight scenes in A Song of Ice and Fire, what makes them great, and how the show traded realism and strategy for spectacle. I cannot wait to talk about how monstrously ludicrous every aspect of The Long Night is. That episode has absolutely no attention to strategy whatsoever. If you want to see this kind of content, or you share the same sentiment, please feel free to like and subscribe. It really goes a long way. I hope to see you all again as we keep waiting for wins.
Get up!